Good evening, everyone. Good morning for those in the west. Good night to those in the east. We get to the closing panel of this Global Forest Summit that is for the first time ever co-organized by Reforest Action and the Open Diplomacy Institute under the high patronage of Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic. For this closing ceremony, we do have the high pleasure, Stéphane and I, to host a prominent speaker from various backgrounds, but all aligned on the same ambition. I would like first to welcome Virginijus Sinkevičius. Virginijus, you're the European Commissioner for the Environment. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you.
I also would like to host very warmly Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos, you're the Chairman and CEO of the Global Environment Facility in Costa Rica in recovering 60% of forest surface in the country. Very welcome, Carlos, to this panel.
It is my great pleasure. Thank you so much.
I should then turn to Selwyn Hart. Selwyn, welcome. You are the Assistant Secretary General of the UN for Climate Emergency and Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General. Thank you for being with us. We will also have, on top of Stéphane Allaire, the founder and president of Reforest Action, with us, two recorded videos that have been enriching the conversation we have tonight with two amazing role models in forestation, in forest protection and restoration. I mean, Mrs. Isabelle Durand. She is the acting Secretary General of the UN Conference for Trade and Development. She has been Vice Prime Minister of Belgium and Vice President of the European Parliament. She had to record a video for us from New York, as she has been appointed Secretary General of Untitled. Very recently, she's now with the UNSG himself for a business meeting. And we will also have a recorded message from Mrs. Barbara Pompili, the French Minister of the Environment and the Ecological Transition, which had to be with the Prime Minister this morning and has recorded a video that we will showcase at the end of this session. So to start the discussion, before we get to the gentleman around me, we will show the message that Isabelle Durand has recorded from New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, forests are a vital asset to our current and future generations. Forests cover 30% of the Earth's surface and are the lungs for a healthy planet. They are essential to fighting climate change and protecting biodiversity. Forests support the livelihoods of 1.6 billion people around the globe, many of whom live in developing countries. Forest products supply 20% of the household income for these families. Natural resources are often located in rural areas where over 70% of the world's poor live. This population depends on forest resources to cover 90% of their needs in terms of food, fuel, medicine, shelter and transportation. These benefits are, however, under threat. As the world population increases, so does the demand to meet its needs, and this increases deforestation. Moreover, illegal logging, which becomes increasingly sophisticated, and the illicit trade of timber are a great concern. Illegal logging accounts for 50 to 90% of all forestry activities in key producer tropical forests. This includes the Amazon basin, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia. According to UNEP and Interpol, forestry crimes such as illegal logging generate an estimated 51 to 152 billion US. These revenues are unaccounted for and untaxed in the legitimate economy. This compares to the total annual global official development assistance commitment of about 152 billion US. Illicit logging causes irreversible damage to the ecosystem and societies. We need to find ways to tackle this problem. We need to ensure that forests are protected, restored, and well managed. This requires a holistic approach. Let me put forward two proposals. First, we need to adopt policies that strengthen and sustainable forest management. Trade, and notably biotrade, can make a valuable contribution as it provides incentive to preserve forest and biodiversity. Biotrade is the collection, production, transformation and commercialization of goods and services derived from native biodiversity in a sustainable manner. By expanding the market of sustainable sourced products, trade increased the economic value of living species for local communities. This gives incentives to protect species and forests rather than driving them to extinction. We know that the demand for nature-based products is increasing sharply as consumers seek sustainability and ethically sourced products. To support biotrade, UNCTAD has launched its update Biotrade Principle and Criteria. These are a set of guidelines for governments and companies to conduct biodiversity-friendly trade and address new challenges and priorities. The guidelines set out how Earth's precious natural resources can be traded in an environmentally, socially and economically sustainable manner. Second, we need to provide developing countries the financial resources to protect and restore their forests and fight climate change. This means that the international community must deliver on the $100 billion climate finance commitment. It also means that we need to incorporate the sustainable management of forest and climate change into the pandemic response. The international community must combine policy tools and sustainable finance to deliver the results needed. One example would be the provision of debt relief to vulnerable countries to create sufficient fiscal space, so that they can invest in sustainable development, including climate change, adaptation and mitigation. The challenges that lie before us are formidable, but in moments of crisis there lies opportunity.
Thank you, Isabel, for having recorded this video, which is a very good wrap of the whole day we've spent together, with the very good aim of raising the ambition towards forest protection and restoration. And to discuss this question that is not only about the economy of forest, it's a global approach to the environmental crisis, that is a twin crisis between climate and biodiversity, that also revolves around health issues. We've been saying the whole day that it's about gaining momentum, building on what is now a grassroots movement of forest entrepreneurs. We've had some proof of leadership the whole day. We hope to keep it up. And we hope that the EU is able to keep up this leadership role. And therefore, I'm turning to Virginijus Sinkevičius on knowing what is at stake in preparing the EU forest strategy and knowing how the EU can be paving the way for a more ambitious way of protecting and restoring forests. I'll make it again because my mic was obviously turned off and Mr. Commissioner did not hear my question. It's a shame. I'll be back there. So the Global Forest Summit has been about raising ambitions to achieve forest protection and restoration. And it's about gaining momentum of every spark of hope and leadership that we've been seeing from grassroots movements, corporations, international organizations with ambitious programs the whole day. We look also for the EU to steer this leadership on the global stage. We've discussed this with Pascal Canfin, the chair of the Environment Committee of the European Parliament this morning. And therefore, I'm turning to Commissioner Sinkevičius about the EU forest strategy that you're preparing. How do we make sure that this forest strategy is another leadership proof to gear up the ambition?
Thank you very much for your question, and sorry that I couldn't hear you at first, but I'm of course very happy to be here with you, to participate, and of course give you the best of answers. And I think this is very timely and important Global Forest Summit in those challenging times, reflecting on ways to keep momentum for priority issues such as the forest protection and restoration. And as you say, if you want to keep it up, if you want people to follow, you have to lead by example. And that is why what we are doing with the transformational agenda to deliver a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. That's the thinking behind the European Green Deal. And as a part of that deal, we are developing a forest strategy with actions for today and, of course, for the future. In the short term, it means more forest protection to preserve stocks and increase EU carbon sinks. But it also means more restoration in areas that are damaged or degraded. And if we want forests to continue to provide their essential and multiple roles, we must ensure that they are healthier and more resilient. And we also want to improve the sustainable management of forests. And looking to the future, we want to increase the forest coverage, and we intend to plant at least 3 billion additional trees in the EU by 2030. I can certainly praise Reforest Action's efforts in that context. We also need forests that can adapt to climate change, that strengthen rural economies, and of course deliver innovative products and services. And our objective is therefore that our forest strategy includes strong, inclusive governance, better monitoring, and secure financial basis. We're still working on the details, but the public consultation is still open. And I warmly invite you to share your views by replying to the online questionnaire. So that's for the domestic front, but we also want to lead on the international one, where we want to promote a sustainable forest approach. We have a new legislation on the way here, as we want to minimize the incentives for deforestation and forest degradation. One way to do it is to prevent products and commodities that stem from deforestation being sold on the EU market. This approach would be based on the deforestation-free requirements that would apply to most impactful commodities, meat, palm oil, and wood, regardless of where they are produced. A chocolate, a burger, these are all consumed within minutes, even seconds. A tree, however, takes years to grow. And our thinking is that we get this legislation right. It will give partner countries an incentive to step up their own forest protection. Strengthened efforts will be required from producer countries, but we also want countries that are major consumers of these commodities to contribute as well. We know that it's ambitious, that no other country has ever adopted such a legislation before, and that we will face multiple resistances, but we can't afford to fail. And we will also redouble our efforts on that path in the context of the upcoming COP26 and COP15 later this year.
Indeed. We've been speaking about the leadership that the EU can give to impetus this movement as we go towards the COP26 for climate and COP15 for biodiversity. But we also need hope based on success stories on forest protection and restoration. And that is why I'd like to turn to Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos, you are now the chairman and CEO of the Global Environment Facility, but you've been running the Environment Ministry of Costa Rica for a few years, getting back forest on half of the country. That is an amazing success story indeed. And we would like to hear from you how you did achieve this on the long run, because that is what is at stake when we know every year we lose the surface of Ireland in terms of forests.
Well, thank you for that question, and my pleasure to do my best to answer it, because it's a complex one. But four things were important in the process by which Costa Rica has been able to halt deforestation and restore the degraded landscape. We went from 21% forest cover in the early 1980s to 52% today, and we are aiming within our NDC to get to 60% forest cover without competing where do we produce our food, or where do we produce our energy, or where do we live. So the four things that we work were policies and efforts that last for more than 1 decade. So good governance, consistency in public policy, and good institutions were key on this. The four things were, we were able to solve a land tenure and right issue. Before the 1960s, the government used to own the forested areas. and governments has proven not to be good stewards of forests. And we began with an effort to give land to the landless people, particularly farmers, and giving legal security around land tenure, and that was key. That was kind of the baseline for the conservation and restoration effort, something that we need to do in many countries of this planet. The second effort was identifying and phasing out all the wrong policies, wrong investment, and perverse incentives. In the 60s, 70s, early 80s, we had the impression that we need to put the land under production, basic agriculture, and that was going to generate income, jobs, and taxes. And that most of the soils were very fragile for productive activities. So we had all kind of incentives to promote productivity, and those incentives basically promoted land use change and deforestation. In the 1960s and 70s, there was even a policy that taxed ownership of forests because they were conceived as unproductive lands. Once more, we were able to go through a long process of phasing out and changing those perverse incentives, and this is something that today we need to do. The third element was we come to realize that not by creating a conservation agency or a forest agency was enough. We learned the hard way. It took us 15, 20 years to learn that we need to create a new institutional framework. We governments work on with respect to the management of natural resources. They work on silos. You got an agency on energy, you got an agency for fishing, you got an agency for protected areas, another for soils. I mean, that doesn't work. So we work based on the presumption that we will never protect our forests with the same institutional framework that in first place created the problem. And we created a couple of agencies that has a vision for landscape management. And the fourth element, we create positive incentives for forest conservation. We recognize that there was a market failure. If you own a forest, you provide environmental services. Someone at the country or at the global level is being benefit by that because of carbon offset, water production, biodiversity conservation. We created a policy which is called Payment for Environmental Services. 1997, we put a tax on fossil fuels. The revenues from the tax of fossil fuels goes to the payment for environmental services. So everybody who uses fossil fuels is paying somebody who owns a forest or a tree plantation for the services of offsetting those carbon emissions. Something that we want to do at the global level, and it hasn't worked yet, but I tend to believe that in COP26 we will be extremely successful in agreeing on Article 6, and we will have a global mechanism for the full recognition of the carbon services. We were very good in putting that mechanism in place, and we began paying the cost of opportunity of doing agriculture and cattle ranching. So it became more attractive to keep your forest, to restore your landscape, than to having cows in those farms, in those sites. So we went from perverse incentive, negative investments, investment done by public development banks, into positive ones. And at the end of the day, we were able to revert those tendencies. So Costa Rica was able to double the size of their forest during the same period that the economy tripled, proving to us that protecting nature is not a burden for growth, prosperity, and the well-being of the people.
That is a very complete answer and very meaningful based on the long-term experience you had in Costa Rica, and indeed it gives hope on the achievability of what we aim at the Global Forest Summit. I was not only speaking about leadership proofs or hope sparks, but also about certitude that at the global scale there is a holistic approach combining biodiversity and climate issues and arenas to achieve something that embeds the global south as well as the global north. And therefore I am turning to Selwyn Hart, Assistant Secretary General of the UN and Special Advisor to the Secretary General, on getting to know how the UN facilitates it at the global scale. We need to achieve it as humanity, as humankind, and not as countries or movements or corporations, but as a whole multi-stakeholder community of actors.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and certainly a pleasure to join you. Stefan, really nice to meet you. And I first wish to thank both of you for this excellent invitation and the Reforest Action colleagues, as well as the Open Diplomacy Institute. And it's a pleasure to join such a distinguished panel. My colleagues have been following the discussions throughout the day, and many useful insights and options and solutions have been put on the table, which we would love to follow up on. The Secretary General has been very clear in his landmark speech yesterday, last year, his State of the Planet speech. He clearly stated that humanity is waging a very dangerous war on nature, and nature is striking back. In the case of forests, this is particularly alarming, because every year we are losing approximately 10 million hectares of forest, which is about 2.5 times the size of Denmark. This has resulted, according to the World Resources Institute, into about 1.8 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions, about half the EU's total emissions, or about 400 million cars. So this is a crisis situation, and any crisis demands an urgent and ambitious response. And you asked specifically about what the UN is doing to address this crisis, the broader environmental crisis. First and foremost, we have a Secretary General who is giving voice to all of these issues, and he's setting the bar for ambition. For example, on climate change, he is the one who has been most vocal in calling on all countries to ensure that their commitments under the Paris Agreement are in line with the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. He has been calling and building a coalition of countries committing to net zero by 2050. And that coalition is growing. But he's also calling on countries really to translate this long-term ambition and this long-term vision into more ambitious near-term commitments. Secondly, we are also supporting concrete actions at the regional, international, and local levels aimed at addressing many of these challenges. One that is very familiar to both of you and to the other colleagues on the panel is the Great Green Wall Accelerator initiative. It's a concrete initiative in a very vulnerable part of our planet, where the objective is to restore 100 million hectares of land, while at the same time creating 10 million jobs. These are the sort of concrete initiatives that the UN is fully behind and supporting to deliver on forest restoration, jobs, and also address many of the adverse drivers to issues like migration and international peace and security. And third, the UN has been and will continue to support the various intergovernmental processes and summits designed to address these issues. You mentioned COP26 under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which will be in Glasgow this year. We also have the Biodiversity COP. And for the very first time, we will have the 3 Rio Convention COPs, because we will also have the desertification COP this year in the latter part of the year, as well as a number of other thematic conferences on transport, on oceans, on energy, which will all seek to address various challenges related to nature and many of the issues that you are working hard on. Thank you.
So we have the hope, we have the leadership proof, we have the certitude that there is a strong agenda to achieve it, but we also need immediate, concrete results. And that is why we've been doing this summit with not only a think tank, the Open Diplomacy Institute, but also a social enterprise, Reforest Action, that Stefan is the president of. And Stefan, I'd like to ask you about this immediate results that we already see as something that we can gain momentum on. How do entrepreneurs of reforestation help us to look beyond the gloomy perspectives that we've been reviewing the whole day?
Yes, it's easy to have a negative look at this because the numbers about deforestation and forest degradations are so big that you can lose patience or lose faith. But when you are a reforestation organization like Reforest Action, it's easier to have a positive approach because we connect the dots between these big figures and local solutions. Working on reforestation is a gift because you work with a number of people, the local people, the governments, the institutions, the NGOs, and being part of this coalition, this energy, helps you having, to look forward with a big smile on your face rather than, being desperate about things. The other thing is we can see science progressing. And thanks to the science, very soon we will be able to monitor hundreds, millions of reforestation projects throughout the world using satellite data. So when you're a reforestation company, you've got your feet on the ground planting trees, and you've got your head in the sky using satellite data to monitor what you're doing and to measure the impact of the projects you run or you help local people to run. And if you consider one thing, organizations like mine, we double or triple every single year our projects. We grow so fast. And when you realize that every single project, reforestation project we perform, is a piece of bioeconomy. It's a business model based on nature. So the more we restore nature, the more wealth we provide to local people, and the more the wealthier they are, the more they restore. So considering the fact that we grow faster than a petroleum-based economy, make me think that we're heading in the right direction.
That is very good to build on the gain momentum, but we are still in the midst of a pandemic. So I keep cautious on optimism there, and we've been revolving the whole day around the One Health approach that is very meaningful to understand that humankind can't be healthy and safe if nature is not healthy and safe. So I'd like to inquire a bit about the way it could accelerate the transition that this moment we've been through, the ordeal we are going through, is giving us also a bigger awareness of the situation. Stefan, I'll remain with you that Reforest Action has also run projects that have shown positive results for the health of local population you've been working with. Could you give us concrete examples of grassroots initiatives that you've been running that have achieved things here?
Yes, I think the most relevant example I have in mind is about a project we had in Haiti. As you know, Haiti has been very dramatically impacted by a hurricane in 2016, a hurricane called Matthew. And we had a project in the region of Grand Anse, which is the far southwest of the country. And the winds and the heavy rain got stuck on our project. And all the vegetation went. The big trees collapsed. Only the small trees we planted the year before remained because, they were, less exposed to the strong winds, I guess. After this hurricane, the landscape was devastated. And people were starving very quickly because they didn't have anything left. So the NGOs provided food for the following days after the hurricane. But what we did with a social business with whom we've worked called Kaleos, who provides cocoa from the mountains of there, we restored their environment. We planted cocoa trees, but not only, a diversity of trees, so we can rebuild a sustainable economy in the region, in the mountains. And we also provided fast-growing plants like banana trees to provide food in the medium term and not only in the long term. After a few years, what we realized with Scaleos is that people remain in their mountains. They don't travel to the suburbs of Port-au-Prince, which is the most healthiest place on earth, I can tell. And because they remain in their region, they love their region, they remain by choice. They have food, they have shelter, and they have the environment in which they want to grow their family. And to me, this is a good example on how restoring environment has an indirect impact on human health.
This is a very, very concrete and easy to picture example. Thank you, Stefan, for letting us know about this. If I remain in the era of the COVID-19 crisis, which is still around us, despite I don't wear a mask, it's also about assessing throughout forest protection and restoration, and in general sense, ecosystems restoration, our capacity to anticipate zoonosis risks, which gives birth to higher, more frequent, more violent danger of pandemic. I'd like to turn to Carlos Rodriguez again and to know whether people have captured the importance of protecting nature to achieve our own capacity to anticipate and prevent other crises like this one.
Well, thank you for this very important question. And I tend to believe that the pandemic has been a stark reminder that the world was on the wrong track with conflict between nature and economic systems causing a global zoonotic disease outbreak. We now need to work towards a COVID-19 recovery that is green, clean, blue, and resilient. Also, and it is important to highlight and say that also changes in land use practices leading to deforestation and forest degradation has benefit people through economic and social development. They have also led to long-term negative impacts in human health and the provision of ecosystem services. And today we recognize that more than ever. So recognizing the adversity and the budgetary strains that COVID-19 pandemic has caused in many developing countries, we at the GF are applying a Greek COVID-19 response lens to all of our programming and investment in developing countries. We're making available additional support where needed to help vulnerable countries continue to advance in that priorities. But we are working to reset, help countries reset their economies in the aftermath of COVID-19. And we're bringing also stakeholders into this. But we need to really recognize that we got a big opportunity to build back better. And yes, this sounds really nice and really strong, but we need to have put a dose of reality on what developing countries are going through, particularly less developed countries where the debt issue is becoming a major issue, not just for the health of their economies and the well-being of people, but also the debt issue is becoming one of the biggest challenges that we are confronted if we want to build back better. So being able to understand how we can help countries in this economic recession building back better by using the natural resources, the natural capital in a smart way is extremely important and relevant.
I'd like to take it from here. We've been speaking about this new motto, build back better, for a few months now since Trump has gone from the White House and that a new spark of hope has begun. But it's also something that belongs and is rooted into the EU Green Deal and the plan Next Generation Recovery. I'd like to ask Commissioner Sinkevičius about the way he is carrying on the approach of the One Health initiative from WHO in this green recovery. We can't achieve a green recovery that is only meant for human health, but also for nature health. And as you also specifically care for biodiversity ahead of COP15 coming, I'd like to know whether you've achieved to put One Health approach on top of the agenda of the European Commission.
Thank you very much for your question. So I think, One Health approach is quite right, and we must recognize the connection between human health, animal health, and healthy, resilient nature. And it's more than time to move from reaction to prevention and to integrate that sort of thinking into all relevant policies and processes. And in the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030, we have committed to enhance our support to global efforts to apply the One Health approach. And last year we have endorsed, together with 84 countries, the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, through which heads of state and government have committed to environmental sustainability in an integrated fashion. Of course, this isn't exactly new. Work has been done regarding the guidance on integrating biodiversity consideration into One Health approaches since 2017. So we have no excuse for delay, and the current pandemic is a very painful reminder that developed economies must put this approach into practice. If we want to be serious about preventing and building up resilience to possible future diseases and pandemics, we must better protect natural ecosystems. In the EU, we are taking concrete steps in that respect. This is in particular the goal of our new biodiversity strategy for 2030, which ambitions to bring nature back into our lives and whose actions are to contribute to a better health of people, animals, and nature. And this is extraordinarily important. Let me remind you of that the world is at risk of losing over 1 million species. Yet nature is the bedrock not only of our economy, but of our health and well-being. We need to keep our ecosystems healthy for so many reasons, for sustainable development, poverty, education, food security, and you name it. And we won't solve the climate crisis unless we address biodiversity loss at the same time. We won't get near the SDGs or any other related targets unless we get these crises under control. All of this doesn't mean little nudges. It means transformative change. And that's why in the EU biodiversity strategy, together with plans for restoring nature and flagship targets for protected areas, organic farming, reduced pesticides and fertilizer use, we have a whole chapter with concrete actions to enable the change. Better measurement for the value of nature and its integration into business decision-making is one of them, and a major step for transformative change.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It is indeed a very important thing that the EU steers and gears up on One Health to achieve this green recovery that is also not only about green, but also about our blood, our breath, our food, our drinks, to make sure we keep safe and healthy. And at the nexus of this topic, there is the so-called twin crisis between the 6-month extinction of biodiversity that we are faster and faster entering in, and the Anthropocene, which is a climate change crisis. It is a double-sided crisis, a complex nexus that we will now discuss on the two sides. I'd like first to get to Carlos Rodriguez. To get there, we need to achieve amplification of our mitigation and adaptation capacities on the climate side. And this requires to embed more the G77 to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. I'd like to know from where you stand at the Global Environment Facility, how you're able to facilitate the work of the UN to get the Global South more ambitious for that end.
Thank you, my pleasure. we need to really understand that commitments under UNFCCC need to be translated into implementation. More than 50 or 60 countries, developing countries, have included REDD+ in their NDCs and have developed their REDD+ strategy, which is the strategy to reduce forest degradation and deforestation. And a lot of efforts has helped to improve the national enabling conditions, but the ecological and social outcomes of existing initiatives stay somehow limited. So the future of these initiatives are very uncertain. How if we are going to have a global carbon forest market, if this is going to be, if we're going to have a result-based payments, are we going to be able to mobilize resources for climate adaptations? So I tend to believe that to achieve this transformation, institutional reform is a necessary step, as I mentioned when I was talking about the experience of Costa Rica. So four things are important here. Forest-based mitigation strategy must be mainstream across all sectors and level of government. It's not just, the Forest Agency, the Ministry of Environment dealing with that. We need to once and for all address with the market failure, be able to achieve from the burden of tax, achieve on the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters. We need to develop a payment for environmental services for water, carbon, and biodiversity at the country level dealing, which is a great tool to deal with that market failure. Of course, we need to work with the private sector at the landscape and also at the jurisdictional level. And yes, funding is important, but funding for me is not a limiting factor. We need to channel incentives to nature positive outcomes. And here's where domestic mobilization of resources is key. We can double and triple the flow of international aid from the north to the south. That won't be enough. We need institutional reforms, policy coherence, and improved efficiency in the mobilization of domestic resources. And I will finalize by saying, and bringing it once more, we need to secure collective tenure of rights and land tenure in order to keep forest. People will not take care of things that are not assigned to a legal right.
Articulating shared but differentiated responsibilities to achieve forest protection and restoration is key to get to the COP26. But there are many examples on the ground that shows us that forests are key to achieve our climate objectives. Reforestation is not a carbon compensation company, it's a reforestation company. But it delivers concrete results on reducing our CO2 emissions. And I'm curious, Stefan, to know how and what kind of projects you've been running that have provided direct results and good examples on the ground across your 30 countries where programs are active.
Yes, forests are looked at with a strong focus on carbon because it's the biggest carbon sink in the world on which we can act. However, having said that, forests are a lot more than carbon sinks. They, as you mentioned, and as everybody's mentioned today, it's home of 80% of biodiversity on the land. It's water, it's soil, it's landscapes, it's beauty, and it's wealth as well. So when we approach reforestation, we look at the projects in a holistic way. I've got a few examples, and what I'm very keen on is agroforestry in tropical regions, because when you plant trees in hurdles or in the crops on private land, on farmers' land, you provide wood, fruits, and with the trees, and these trees enrich the soil as well for the crops, and these trees will slow deforestation because the farmers, if he needs wood, he will take from the trees on his field and not in the primary forest nearby. But as we have a high representative of Europe here with us, I'd like to take an example in Europe. We run hundreds of projects in every country in Europe nearly. The key issue in Europe is not deforestation any longer, because we don't have primary forest, well, or very, very few, but it's degradation. Our forests are impacted by climate change, so we need to adapt our forest to the new climate, and we need to do assisted regeneration, reforestation, natural regeneration, sorry, so we can come from forest with, I don't know, native trees that cannot any longer grow because of the new climate we have and the climate we will have in 50 years from now, by adapting this forest by planting new trees while still keeping the forest cover. And running these projects all over Europe is key, and it comes in addition to the 3 billion trees that the European Commission is aiming at during the next few years. But it's another example of what forests can do to mitigate, but also to be adapted to climate change.
Sure. Well, we've been speaking quite extensively about climate, but as I said, it's a twin crisis between climate and biodiversity. And I'm turning back to Selwyn Hart. I know you're working very hard towards the COP26 for climate in Glasgow, but I'm more curious about another aspect of your job, which is to make sure it articulates correctly with the COP15 incoming about biodiversity. We need to understand, because we have been witnessing this the whole day, there is no adaptation policy or mitigation policy as relates to forest that does not take into account the role that biodiversity plays in achieving our objectives in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So I'm curious, how do you coordinate with biodiversity conference in preparing the COP26 for climate?
Thanks. Across the UN system, there are multiple fora to enable that level of coordination between not only the two conventions, but the secretariats that have responsibility for servicing the work of the two conventions. And at the level of the Secretary General, he has been very clear. This year, 2021, is a year of healing. And it's not only the biodiversity COP that will be held this year. We have, for the very first time, said earlier, we will have the 3 Rio conventions meeting this year, and we'll have a series of thematic conferences on transport, on oceans, on energy that will also be held. And the plan is for us to look at this entire calendar of moments for the environment and for development, and look at how all of these moments can provide countries with options and solutions as they seek to build back from the COVID-19 crisis.
We do hope that, that the day we've spent together virtually from all around the world today to advocate for strong forest restoration and protection has been fueling, if I should say, this forums articulating biodiversity, climate protection and health issues. I'm always afraid that carbon neutrality has dominated the debate around the environmental issues. And that's why I'm turning back to Commissioner Sinkevičius. The EU has made strong statements about its objectives to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and to reduce its carbon emissions by 50%. But we've been hearing you less about biodiversity. So as we go towards this COP15 coming, and as we look at forests as habitat for 80% of species, how do you make sure that the ambitions of the European Union on biodiversity is as strong as for climate?
When you're saying that you hear less, I'm straight away motivated to do even a better job in my capacity to make sure that not only climate change is a buzzword around the globe, but biodiversity as well.
That's the problem for everyone. We are in the city of Paris, where the climate agreement has been signed off 5 years ago. So obviously we keep hearing about this, but it's future generations, they fight for climate, they don't fight for biodiversity. So that's why I'm asking the question, how do you make sure it keeps on top of the agenda?
Not yet. I think where climate started better, before answering your question, where climate started better, that climate have a very clear goal of zero, full decarbonization. And then with the biodiversity, we're still getting to that. And I think 30-30 and 10 under strict protection is something that we could agree and move on and get the support. But the climate change agenda and the protection of biodiversity are actually the same battle. They are two sides of the same coin. In practice, that means we can't reach climate neutrality without the help, in particular, of forests. At the same time, climate change and pollution affects the capacity of forests to store carbon. And that is why it's imperative to have more forests and to keep them in a better condition. For that, we need stronger action on the ground. At the European level, we are taking various complementary steps. First, we are enhancing the areas under legal protection. We will increase the area of protected lands, including forests, to 30% of the EU territory. And there will be stricter protections for the most valuable areas, including primary and old growth forests. Secondly, we are acting to restore the damage that has already happened. We need to act fast and strong because only 14% of our protected forest habitats are in good conservation status. Part of the problem is a failure to enforce the protections that are already in place. So we are stepping up action to make sure that member states apply the laws correctly. But there is also need to restore forests outside protected areas. So right now we are assessing options for a new legislation on ecosystems restoration. The need for this is very real. Huge areas of EU forests, hundreds of thousands of hectares have died in recent years because of pests, drought, habitat fragmentation, wildfires, and overexploitation. So it's vital to build up resilience, and we laid out some of those paths in a new EU strategy on adaptation to climate change just a few days ago. Last but not certainly least, we are launching a new drive to increase the area of EU forest and the number of trees. And this, of course, includes a pledge of already mentioned plant at least 3 billion additional trees by 2030, according to, of course, ecological principles in areas that are fit for more trees. And we are very conscious that this is not just about numbers. We need the right trees in the right places for the right purpose. And there is great potential here for greening cities and for increasing agroforestry, but also for creating woodlands that are naturally diverse, more resilient to climate change, and more resistant to invasive species.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The words you've pronounced echo very much to the words that the UN Secretary General usually speak with to talk about this issue. The aim of achieving a triple objective: people, planet, and prosperity. That is actually the goal of the SDGs, summed up from 17 objectives to 3 key words. We will not have the time to inquire in detail what it does mean in his own word. We will refer to the landmark speech he has made that Selwyn Hart has referred to earlier. But I'm curious on knowing how it can relate to the job that the Global Environment Facility is envisioning for the UN Decade on Ecosystems Restoration. We have pictured out the whole day that we can't miss the target of ecosystems restoration, as it's about our health, our well-being, our economy, the sake of climate, for the sake of biodiversity. And I know, Carlos Rodriguez, that you've been working very intensively on a roadmap to make it happen with the means of the Global Environment Facility, right?
That is correct. The Global Environmental Facility mandate and expertise make us unique and suited to lead at this moment in those very specific topics of forest conservation and restoration. We have high ambition for the coming decade and definitely plans to achieve them. By definition, we are a huge partnership that includes 183 countries, 18 agencies, and multiple partners. And the income and replenishment process will be a unique opportunity to highlight the very successful experiences, but most important, be able to support countries in their many and different ambitious targets within the Rio Convention. But also, let me bring this to your attention. We don't have just a climate and a biodiversity crisis. We had a pollution crisis. The chemical and waste is a big issue, and the GEF is the financial mechanism to help countries implement the different chemical and waste convention, which is incredibly important and relevant. The GEF funding, which is around $1 billion per year, is tiny compared to the scale of the needs. So we need to the needs that we need to address. Our impact come from our ability to bring together government, civil society, and private sector agents of change in support of innovative solutions that can be scaled up. So as we begin our next replenishment process, which is going to be the 8th, we take a look to the whole decade in a holistic approach, which is going to be critical for the achievement of the global environmental ambitions and the need to build back better in a society that begins to really understand the positive interaction within human systems and nature. And we're really excited of the opportunity to continue being engaged in this very productive partnership and supporting programs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we are about to wrap up the first Global Forest Summit, I'd like to introduce to this panel the recorded message that Mrs. Pompili has recorded for us as the Minister for the Ecological Transition, that is meant to conclude this event, co-organized by Reforest Action and the Open Diplomacy Institute under the high patronage of President Macron.
Chers collègues, chers amis, tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier Open Diplomacy et Reforest Action pour avoir organisé ce sommet. Les échanges du jour ont montré à la fois l'importance de conserver et de restaurer nos forêts et l'urgence d'agir. Les forêts stockent le carbone et jouent un rôle majeur sur l'équilibre du climat. Elles abritent 80% de la biodiversité terrestre mondiale. Elles nous rendent donc des services vitaux. Et malgré cela, nous n'en prenons pas soin. Les forêts sont détruites, mal gérées. Nous négligeons la santé de ce bien que nous avons en partage. Et nous en payons le prix. Parfois un prix très cher d'ailleurs, alors même que les scientifiques soulignent régulièrement le lien entre la déforestation et les zoonoses. Il nous faut apprendre à gérer ensemble ce bien commun, inventer un multilatéralisme écologique efficace. Pour ces raisons, la France s'est engagée à protéger les forêts tant sur son territoire que dans le monde. Au niveau international, le président Emmanuel Macron a organisé le 11 janvier dernier un One Planet Summit entièrement dédié aux enjeux de la biodiversité, au cours duquel des engagements importants ont été pris. Je pense à la Grande Muraille Verte en Afrique subsaharienne pour créer un rideau forestier de 100 millions d'hectares du Sénégal à Djibouti. Notre enjeu, c'est de récolter 14 milliards d'euros d'ici à 2025 pour promouvoir les pratiques agroécologiques, l'agroforesterie et la plantation d'arbres pour lutter contre la désertification, la malnutrition, la pauvreté et les conflits armés dans cette région. Parce que l'Afrique centrale abrite la deuxième forêt tropicale au monde. C'est pourquoi la France collabore aussi à l'initiative CAFI qui vise à protéger ces écosystèmes uniques au monde et essentiels pour la régulation du climat. Ces efforts s'inscrivent naturellement dans la décennie de la restauration des écosystèmes 2021-2030, lancée en février 2019 par l'ONU. Selwyn Hart a, je crois, souligné toute l'importance de ces actions. La France co-préside également la coalition de la haute ambition pour la nature et les peuples avec les gouvernements du Costa Rica et du Royaume-Uni. Avec cette coalition, nous essayons de mobiliser la communauté internationale pour que 30% des terres et des mers de notre planète soient protégées d'ici 2030. Nous portons cette ambition dans la négociation du futur cadre stratégique mondial sur la biodiversité qui sera, je le souhaite, adopté à la COP15. Si la protection des forêts est essentielle, leur restauration est aussi fondamentale. Les terribles incendies dans la région amazonienne nous le montrent. Et c'est pourquoi, lors de la présidence française du G7 en 2019, le président Macron a mobilisé ses partenaires en créant l'Alliance pour les forêts tropicales, une aide d'urgence pour arrêter les incendies et un plan de reboisement ont été mis en place. Les membres du G7 se sont également engagés à lutter contre la déforestation, notamment grâce à des chaînes d'approvisionnement durables pour les produits agricoles. Oui, on l'oublie trop souvent, la France est aussi un pays amazonien, avec en Guyane française le plus grand parc national français et européen, modèle de conservation de la forêt primaire. Chacun se doit d'être exemplaire. Aussi, la stratégie française 2020-2030 des espaces protégés vise à protéger 30% de notre territoire terrestre et maritime d'ici 2022, dont 10% sous protection forte. Chers collègues, il faut que nous prenions collectivement conscience des impacts de nos modes de consommation sur la destruction des forêts. Nous ne pouvons plus fermer les yeux sur les conséquences de certains accords commerciaux sur la nature. Il est grand temps de réconcilier le commerce avec l'impératif écologique. Et c'est dans cet esprit que la France n'a pas souhaité signer en l'état l'accord avec le Mercosur. Par ces importations, l'Union européenne était responsable entre 1990 et 2008 de 10% de la déforestation mondiale. Cela n'est plus possible. Je porterai ce dossier dans le cadre de la présidence française de l'Union européenne en 2022. Sur le plan national, nous nous y attaquons, car il faut être cohérent. En 2018, nous avons lancé une stratégie nationale de lutte contre la déforestation importée pour mettre fin aux importations de produits liés à la déforestation, à la dégradation des forêts ou à la conversion des écosystèmes naturels d'ici 2030. La France est le premier pays à avoir une telle stratégie et sa mise en œuvre est une priorité absolue pour le gouvernement. Enfin, le plan de relance français contribuera à la restauration de nos forêts et à leur adaptation aux évolutions du climat en France. Avec un plan de 200 millions d'euros, c'est l'action la plus importante pour les forêts depuis la Seconde Guerre mondiale dans notre pays. Le déploiement de solutions fondées sur la nature aidera à répondre aux défis économiques et sanitaires tels que l'emploi, l'innovation et l'économie circulaire, ainsi que la santé environnementale, animale et humaine à l'échelle mondiale. J'invite tous les partenaires à redoubler d'efforts pour accélérer l'action en faveur de la préservation et de la restauration des forêts et des écosystèmes. Je vous remercie.
Well, this is the wrap-up of the of the day, the last minister and public leader talking to us about what we can achieve when we enter this 2021 expected super year for nature. It needs to be proven. But the Global Forest Summit that happens today from Paris and that echoes all around the world has been clearly laying out an agenda with three main priorities for forest. A, protection comes first. It's about nature conservation, the most easy, ambitious, efficient solution we need to have in mind. Second, restoration of ecosystems as we enter the UN decade for ecosystems restoration, as they provide to us much more services than carbon offsetting, of course. And last, reforestation itself, as we've been entering into a phase where deforestation is slightly slowing down, but remains very important. Reforestation remains an important issue. This has given some lessons from civil society organizations, from indigenous leader, from academia leader, from business leader, and from political leader. Those three lessons are the sense of emergency. We enter the decade of action, and there is no longer time to talk. It's about action. It's about ambition. Second, the sense of responsibility. No one, not a single citizen, not a single SME, not a single international organization or parliament is away from accountability about forest protection and restoration and can be part of a bigger coalition that revolves around this great issue. And the last is humility. Nothing can be achieved without a multi-stakeholder approach that brings together the energy of NGOs, of intellectuals and scientists, the power of government and companies to get to the point where we need to be in 10 years at the end of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. With my friend Stéphane Allaire, we would like to thank you for being with us the whole day for this very first Global Forest Summit. And I'll share now the last word with Stéphane Allaire, the president of Reforest Action, who's been co-organizing the whole summit with me.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, dear panelists, for this closing session. We've met today around 40 people from all over the world, from different countries, from different origins and different viewpoints. And I've noted a number of conclusions from the discussions we had. First of all, I think we have shared scary figures about deforestation and degraded land. We have witnessed the diversity of stakeholders. We are not all the same, and that's very positive news. We have seen the diversity of viewpoints and approaches. We don't all agree, but I think we have the same will, which is a good starting point. We have understood the need to change our approach to a new relationship to nature. You can call it harmony, you can call it positiveness or bioeconomy. Whatever name you give to it, think about the new approach you would like to have to nature. We have learned best practices to implement forest restoration and protection projects. We have funds, but not enough. Mr. Rodriguez, you say that it's not a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck for me and for reforestation companies. I'm happy to talk further about this subject if you wish. We need, and you're right, we need to allocate these funds to high-quality projects, to diverse forests and agroforestry projects. Finally, I think as Jane Goodall has shown in a brilliant way today, the emotion is a good driver for action. So my invitation is to discover forest, to love forest, and to protect and restore. Thank you very much all for your participation to this first Global Forest Summit. Thank you, Thomas, for organizing it with us. Thank you.
Thank you all, and we will hopefully meet next year with bigger results and bigger ambitions.
Thank you.